Eric, thank you so much for having us, this huge crew over.
It's my pleasure.
It's the end of what's been an amazing journey, and I don't know if you recall how it began, but basically I've always been a massive fan, but I'd never looked into who you were or what you looked like, and you came round to see some studios in northwest London.
That's exactly right.
And I remember you came in and you were introduced to this guy called Eric, and it's a dashing American chap who dabbles in choral music, I was told, and you left my studio, you went into Paul's, and then you came out of both of them. I just went, was that Eric Whitacre? Dashed out. Paul opened his door and he went, is that Eric Whitacre? And I think we rugby tackled you out of the door. And it's been a marvellous journey ever since, but that's how it began.
Synchronicity.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been talking for a while. You started using some of our libraries, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then basically you came to NAMM. I don't know if you recall, it was very noisy. You were with your son.
I was with my son.
And he was quite disorientated by the noise.
Yeah.
And we started talking about, I basically pitched you this quite complex idea of like an Evo cube, and it was, it's quite a difficult technical thing, but there was all of this noise going on. But the thing I remember the most is I'd inadvertently mentioned that there was a volcano in my back garden. To your son.
That's right.
And he wouldn't let us get a word in edgeways about anything but this volcano.
He still talks about the volcano.
Excellent stuff. So, I mean, for you, as an amazing choral composer, what is the interest in creating a sample library, this project with Spitfire?
Well, when you first approached me about it, when you and Paul first approached me, I was reticent at first. I thought, here's this beautiful, sacred gem of an instrument, and then will I somehow sully it by giving it to the world? And then the more we talked, and the more I realized, actually, this is exactly what I want to do. Like the idea that composers could have these sounds at their fingertips and start thinking about the voice in a different way, that became thrilling for me.
Absolutely. I think one of the most amazing things about sampling is that I never perceive it as a means of getting rid of the original.
Yeah.
These samples sound amazing, but when you hear the choir live, it's something else. But I think sampling operates in this magical world of being able to create the impossible. And I think that's what, not only did we get the essentials, we also had a lot of fun with it, didn't we?
Yeah, I think creating the impossible is exactly it. There was an aesthetic during the recording where we would take, here's a traditional choral sound, but then how intimate can we go? How subtle can we go? How emotional can we go? That I wasn't prepared for. I really thought it would just be, sing a G, on an oo, sing a fa, but actually it turned out to it have all this depth that I could never have imagined.
Absolutely. And for me, I think one of the ambitions was to try and re-educate people about how they kind of treat and consider choirs to be. They're often very much kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Typecast, certainly within the realm of choral music within films, TV and games.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's either sacred or angelic or apocalyptic, right? There's these things that voices are called on to do. And I always thought that the beauty of the human voice is that it carries just terabytes of emotional information, right? A single note sung by a person, there's just endless textures and emotional textures in there. And that when you have massed voices together, it becomes this way of communicating not just emotion, but the subtleties of emotion, really specific colors emotionally. And I don't find this with any other instruments. I love the strings, I love the brass, I love winds, I love rock and roll, I love electronica, but something about the human voice is completely unique in its ability to communicate emotion.
But something that you also do in your music is you very much consider the choir to be an orchestra. Is that a correct kind of?
Yeah, I think I write orchestrally for the voice, maybe is the way that I think about it. So that the palette of colors is much broader than I think a lot of people think about when you're using just voices. From these delicate whispers to these gritty, you can use the diction to also communicate all these things like you would with an orchestra. And then you can also mass voices in a way that gives, well, to my ears, this shimmer, this cloud of overtones, the way that an orchestra does. So it can have the epic grandeur of an orchestra, but it can also be incredibly delicate.
And I think where the serendipity for me, from an artistic point of view, and why I'm such a fan of your work, Eric, is that you share my love of the voice without too much vibrato.
Yeah.
I mean, is there something you want to kind of talk about where that's concerned?
Yeah, see, I think because most of my recordings with my choir are with the women all singing straight tone, people assume that I only want straight tone. Actually, I love vibrato voices, right? I love a big, rich Brahmsian sound or a Verdi-like sound, this romantic singing. But for me, when there's close harmonies together or a purity of harmonic intention, then it has to be without vibrato. Otherwise, it loses coherence, musical coherence. You can't hear that, those interlocking notes together. And so, yeah, generally what I do is as you go up the scale, there's less and less vibrato. So if you start with the basses, they can sing full and rich, warm sound. Tenors a little bit less, altos definitely a little bit less, and then sopranos like glass.
And I think that's what we agreed upon trying to capture from the get-go. A lot of stuff out there is very kind of big Gregorian style, and I wanted us to capture that, the magic of that aesthetic. And also in considering that the choir is yet another, section almost of an orchestra, or an orchestra unto itself, there was only one place that we could record them.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, at Air Studios.
Magical.
Yeah, magical. It must be my favorite recording room in the world. There's something about the atmosphere in there. It's perfect for voices. Mm-hmm. Absolutely perfect. It's got just the right amount of bloom, and also just the architecture that still remains. Right. It feels it's got all the spiritual uplift of its original intention. Right. As a church, but then you can do real nuts and bolts recording in there.
It's sensational. I think also there has to be something to be said about the real sense of family there. You feel part of it. And, recording for me is about feeling as well as just capturing a great sound. And they're wonderful there. I think one of the other massive honours of working on this library are being able to work with these singers. And do you want to talk about this amazing talent?
Yeah, to me, it's unparalleled. There's this group of singers, there's 70 or 80 of them that are in London. And they sing for the Tallis Scholars, they sing for Tenebrae, they sing for some of the best choirs in the world. And then over the years, I've just sort of selected my favorite 18, not only singers, but personalities. Mm-hmm. So it's just this, you mentioned family. It feels like this beautiful family. And what these British singers can do, they can sight read I've never seen anything like it. They sight read like orchestral players. So it doesn't matter what you put in front of them, it just happens. And then they're trained from the earliest age to actively blend.
Yes.
Right? So no matter who they're standing next to, where they're at, they're listening, adjusting. It's these tiny micro adjustments, but you get almost immediately this placid lake of sound. It's beautiful. It's really, and for me, conducting in front of that, I could do this all day, every day. I get physiologically affected by just the beauty of sound.
Absolutely. And we, very much went for, I think something that I noticed is their ability to understand nuance. I've worked with some other choirs in other parts of the world, and you'll find there'll just be someone who just sings that way. That's the noise that they make when they open their voice, lots of vibrato, even if everyone's been told to sit on a bit. But they are fascinated by nuance, very fine tuning.
Yes.
I mean, tuning in the kind of mechanical sense, not pitch necessarily.
Yeah, exactly. And I find that they're artists at the highest level. So it's not that they've just been hired to show up and sing notes. They want to make it. They want to make every experience this artistic, spiritual experience. And so you feel the intention behind every single note, which I think is why I desperately wanted to be at every session conducting.
Yes. So that was amazing. We managed to align the planets, get Air Studios booked, find a hole in your massively busy schedule, but also get this amazing group of musicians together for many, many days.
Yeah, I think 13 full days, right? We were there?
Right,
yeah.
Yes. And what was amazing is we flew you over, you're based in America, and you were incredibly jet-lagged, but still conducted every single note.
Yeah, incredibly jet-lagged. This part I remember well. But yeah, I know for me, in that room with that group of singers, that the energy coming at me from that, I really feel like I could do it all day. I don't need to sleep. I don't need to eat. It's there's a buzz that happens from listening to voices at that level and that in tune, frankly. Especially when we were doing some of the evos and creating little miniature pieces. And you remember in the room, we would just try things.
Yes.
Let's try this. How about this? Oh, let's put a little of this. And then, I went to sleep just with a smile on my face every night. I thought, that's the best day ever.
And something Olafur Arnold said about when we did some sessions at Air Studios with him was he found fascinating, again, about the impossibility of sampling, is to be able to sculpt and structure every individual thread. So instead of a piece, or a group of people, you're talking about individual notes. And I think that was a fascinating experience as well.
Yeah, truly, because that's how I compose, right? So there's the macrocosmic approach for composition, right? The structure of the thing and where things play out over time and how they are called back. But then there's the microcosmic version. And so, for instance, when I'm composing, I take great care with every single line. I sing through it, even badly, it's so that every line has its own logic, its own reason, and then slowly try to make that all work together in this complex fabric of a piece. But to break it down in the room and then just say, okay, eventually this is going to be part of something much larger, but right now let's hyper focus on this one perfectly musical moment, right? A 22-second phrase comes up, comes down, and try to capture perfection in just this small little microcosm. It was transcendent for me, frankly.
So it was a rare experience for me as well to see and just to imagine how this was going to turn out. Just every single note, a polished gem was something else. Something else that we talked about is, something that you mentioned before, is about getting your close harmonies when they're singing without vibrato. You can get these tight semitones, these clusters.
Yeah.
But something quite magical happens with these tight harmonies, isn't it?
Yeah, for me, I discovered early on that a minor second or a major second made me. I just covered with chills. I still am. I feel it in my gut, in my body, my face. Sometimes I flush. And that when voices do that, especially, and voices singing around me, I really can't sing. Like, I start giggling uncontrollably. It's so moving to me. And so as I began to compose, I would just my first pieces are just filled with these clusters, these tight harmonies, in an effort to take the text and illuminate these emotional moments. So if we're coming into a sentence and here's this emotional moment, then you use these clusters that way. And then early on, I realized that not only could you sort of tickle the soul with these things, but you could do them in a very specific way. So you might have a cluster that sounds like sorrow tinged with melancholy with a tiny bit of hope in the overtones. All of that's happening in a single chord. And so when the singer sings straight tone and it's in tune and you're activating this harmonic cloud above it, I really think you have the ability then to speak on an incredibly deep emotional level.
However, when we did some experiments, we felt that creating these, I think up to, was it a major third or a minor third? We felt that actually just by getting one note and combining it with another and creating a close harmony didn't work as effectively as when it is actually in the room. There's a thing called a rub, isn't it, or a vibration?
Yeah, that's right. You mean, are you talking like specifically with the samples that?
Yeah, do you remember we actually recorded some of the tighter intervals because we've worked out, I believe, that there is a kind of rub that happens.
Yes, absolutely.
And the room reacts to that rub. It's reverberating that rub. So when you got two samples together and put them in as a kind of a minor second, you didn't get the effect of that rub because the room was reacting to.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You're not really getting the addition of A plus B, right?
Yes.
If you've got a nice artificial reverb bloom on it, you might get an approximation of it. But yeah, you don't really get. And what's I think even less than that, what you don't get is you get human beings responding to it, right? If you're in the middle of a minor second, you're going to sing your note differently than you will. Oftentimes when I'm working with choirs, I'll use the analogy that on those rubs, those tight dissonances, that what you want it to feel like is a bruise, that when you press it, it hurts and feels good at the same time.
Yes.
Where it's just like, oh God, that kind of thing. And unless you're in the room as the performer, if you're part of that bruise, then you kind of lean into it, just all these micro adjustments and you can't really get those when you play one sample and then another sample.
So that was something that we did with the library, is to capture some of those important close harmonies.
That's exactly right. So then what we did, and we took very specific ones, ones that, okay, that's a clear emotional color, that minor second or that major second on that vowel with that phrase. And then we recorded that very thing in a perfect little sample so that could be then used in combination with other samples.
So we've been through an extensive process of post-production. We've created our own plugin for this, which is very exciting. And you've had some very early kind of alpha and beta versions. And how have you found it? It's a bit strange.
Yeah, I mean, first it's uncanny because I remember being in the room and when I play it, I can see the faces of those singers, right? I know these people. A lot of them are really close friends. And so that's just a very personally strange experience. And then I find that it immediately opens up. Like if I just play a single chord, I'm there. I'm in that uplift of whatever it is that masked voices do. I'm just in that space immediately, which is beautiful. Most of the time when I'm composing classical music, I compose away from the keyboard so that I don't end up writing like a pianist, and I try to write for the voices themselves. But one thing that's beautiful is to just sit at the piano and play a little bit, play those samples, and then be in that space and reminded, oh yeah, that's right. Actually, all it takes is this gesture, and that is so beautiful. Mm-hmm. This is another thing that I love about writing for voices is that, oftentimes just a simple minor triad held is all you need, right? You don't need to dress it up. It doesn't need to be overly written. It's sophisticated because it's so simple.
Absolutely. And it has a gravity to it, as we said. I'm sure it's something to do with the fact that the first things we hear and understand are our mother and father's voices.
No question. Yeah, I'm certain too. I think it's built in. And so I think it goes deep, at the cellular level probably.
So Eric, I mean, one of the toughest things to do when building one of these libraries is, there are so many preconceived ideas of what sampled choir libraries should be. And I think that we wanted to go back to the drawing board and very much approach it like it was an orchestra, not a virtual voice, if you know what I mean. So I don't know if you want to talk about how we laid out and planned what we were going to record.
Yeah, I mean, well, starting with, I think that was the very first thing we talked about was like a word builder, word machine. So there are some sample libraries that do this, I think, and we decided very early on we didn't want to do that. And for me, the reason was very aesthetic. Like I find the word builders are, I suppose they're good tools just to get a sense of what consonants and vowels sound like in the context of that music. But for me, when you're writing choral music, writing for choir, the word is everything. It's not a random generated thing that you can just throw onto something. If you have words being sung, they dictate the phrase that you're composing. They dictate the climax of each sentence. And so to just have these words here and there, it didn't make sense to me. It kind of diluted what singers do well. That then freed us up, I thought, because then we thought, okay, let's use it more like a paintbrush. Let's use each of these vowels, these oohs, ahs, ehs, e's, in their purest possible form, and all of the colors that you can find without using words. How can you paint with those things? Mm-hmm. Just a small red dot, a swath of sound, and that, I think that those initial conversations liberated us to make the sample library the way we did.
So we've got some traditional vowel sounds, and then we go very much into, areas where people may not have experienced, kind of choral stuff with rhythmic passages, shorts, and obviously these kind of evolutions as well.
The irony that the human body really is the only instrument that doesn't need another instrument. It's just right here. The irony is that it's so flexible. It can do so many different things, right? So there's the purity of those Latinate vowels that we're using, but then everything from whispers to gritty sounds to you can sing back in the throat, more in the chest, get these higher, sharper sounds. The palette, to continue to use the metaphor of painting, is deep. There are lots and lots of colors that you can pull from just a group of vocalists.
And we enjoyed working on the concept of the evolutions. And not everyone will know what these are, these kind of evolutions, so to speak. I don't know if you want to talk that through.
In general, the way with an evolution works is that it's a single gesture on the keyboard. And then from that is they're kind of micro compositions in a way, or building blocks for compositions. But they do a lot, they evolve, right? Musically and sonically they evolve. And we found incredibly subtle ways of evolving them. So just barely perceptible as they're moving and growing, and then some are quite dramatic. And then the idea is that you can take and you can just 1, 2, 3, 4 of these evolutions, combine them, or cycle through them as one evolves and bring up a little bit of this and bring a little down. And suddenly you're painting music in a completely different way than the traditional linear way of, all right, let's write from here to here to here. It's more just sculpting sound in real time, sculpting the voices in real time. Yes, so instead of traditional linear composition where you write notes, a phrase from here to here, there's a way of using the evos to sculpt sound. And especially with the voices, you can, evolve here a little bit, and then a little bit of this and a little here. And frankly, I wish I could compose more like this in my daily life. I wish I wasn't, it's always the pencil and paper and then give this. It would be so nice to just sculpt this way and push, pull. And you can create minutes worth of music this way. And profoundly beautiful music.
And this is one of the things I think the joint kind of ambitions of this library is to get people to think about not typecasting choral music and thinking about using it differently. What are your kind of ambitions where that's concerned?
Yeah, that's it exactly. So I hope for composers who are using it for film or for television or for classical composition, I hope, of course, that in moments of typical moments, angelic moments, that it's helpful there. But I like the idea of subverting that and finding places where the voices can serve as a subtext that no one would ever consider before.
Yeah.
Right? Because it draws on, it's not just a sense of emotion, but there's an ancientness to it, right?
Yes.
And not just a sacred tradition ancientness, like you were saying, that it goes back as old as humankind, the sound of the voice. And so I think you can imbue a scene with real depth by using voices in a way that you might never consider using them.
And we've purposely shot a whole bunch of footage as part of the kind of launch promotional material as a means of trying to encourage people to think differently about the use of the choir. And I think for me, the impact of seeing some desert scenes, some rundown towns in Nevada, and to add a voice suddenly connects me to that scene as a viewer, not necessarily, I don't feel alienated by this kind of alien land. It's not, well, this is Britain.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
That's right. Yeah, it's the magic of film scoring, isn't it? And scoring for television, that just the right musical cue will, it gives this depth, this effervescence above or below the thing. For me, watching especially those desert scenes, it speaks close to my heart because that's where I grew up.
Of course.
And it had never occurred to me, and actually until I was in London, and I was talking with the choral conductor, Stephen Layton, and he had performed a piece of mine, and he said, when he first looked at the score, he opened it up and he said, only an American could have written this. Right now, it never even occurred to me that I was an American composer or I even thought like an American. But now I think I know what he's talking about, that growing up in these wide open spaces, these huge skies, that somehow it found its way into my sense of aesthetic. And I know that even when I was making the sample library, there's a lot of the open desert in there, right? It's just, what I love about the West Coast and the desert is that it's pregnant with possibility.
Yeah.
Anything is possible over here. And I feel like somehow you feel that bloom in the desert. It's such a harsh environment, but there's such possibility. And I think it made its way into the sound.
So for a lot of composers using this library, they'll be very experienced using strings, winds, brass, that kind of stuff, but may be daunted by the concept of writing choral music or writing a choral score. Is there any, as someone of a vast amount of experience as yourself, is there any kind of tips that you would offer to choral composition?
How to write? Oh, so well.
Don't give away the nuclear codes, obviously.
I would start with the most basics, and this actually applies, I would say, to almost all music, but that it's all about the breath. So Schoenberg very famously defined a phrase as any group of notes you can sing in one breath. I think that's super important to start with. So the idea is that when you're writing for voices, even if you're not a singer, take a breath, write your phrase. Right? Okay, so already the thing just starts to work like it's supposed to. Now, what's beautiful with voices is, especially masked voices, you can then subvert that. So singers do this thing, and we do it on the sample library, where they stagger breathe, right? So let's say you've got a long held note. I do this at the end of Sleep and at the end of Luxor Rumque. This impossibly long note. A single person couldn't hold it this long. But what will happen is you've got 6, 8 sopranos. They're dropping out, taking a breath, coming back in, dropping out. So the line is always here, but one at a time, they drop out at different places. And I think that what that does to the mind is creates a sense of, that's impossible. That's unreal. Yeah. And in that moment, there's this psychic uplift that happens subconsciously. So I would say that anybody writing, start and think about the breath, that it's all about the breath, either the way that it's supposed to work or subverting that kind of thing. And then when it comes to voicing, if anybody's interested, my general feeling is that it all has to do with the overtone series, right? So the way I'll generally lay things out, if you're looking at a piano, the left is always spread. So I almost always voice things, let's say a fifth, boom, boom, and then the third up here. So bass, baritone, tenors here, and then your inner voices here, they can start to form the outline of the overtone series, and they can get closer together. And what that does is the crunch is here, and then this foundation here causes all of these overtones to be activated, and you get this shimmering cloud over here. It's a pretty simple way to find your way into the middle of paradise.
Well, I know what I'm going to be doing in my hotel rig tonight. It's not just the big sample library that we've made with you, Eric. Something very early on that you said you wanted to do was to create something that we can give away. Do you want to talk about the thinking behind that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was, I remember when we were first talking about this, and I thought, what we ought to do is release, some little footage, so maybe some of this beautiful footage that's been shot out in the desert, and then offer this with the ability to score this stuff, so that composers could take maybe these little 1-minute clips and try out the instruments. But then we talked, how do we get a chance for them to try it without having the whole library? And you said, well, it's all there, we can do this. And so I love the idea of them having a version that was playable enough, like all kinds of colors in there, and then they could take and score these moments, try it out, just kind of get their feet wet. For me, that is thrilling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what I'm really excited about is for me, it's something that as a human you should experience. Actually playing something and hearing it come out with a beautiful kind of choral voice. And it's not just for musicians, and it's just for other humans to experience, I think.
Oh, this for sure. So, obviously I guess I've become a bit of an evangelist for singing. And I think the reason for that is I believe that singing has genuine physiological and spiritual health benefits. So just being around choirs, being around choral music, we now have lots of good science that shows that it has a profound physiological effect on the body. So if for no other reason, I would love people just to download this and spend a few minutes with a choir. It's just gonna make your day better. Yeah. It really would, yeah. It's and then, who knows, maybe some of them might go out and join a choir or sing. This would be a dream for me.
Well, that's fantastic, Eric. Thanks so much for welcoming us into your home, and thanks for coming on this amazing journey with us. It's been a real honor.
It's an honor for me, truly a pleasure. Thank you.
Brilliant.